Petyr Baelish had made a career out of slipping through the cracks in the walls that others thought impenetrable. He was no warrior, no paragon of chivalry, nor a blooded king with ancient lineages to claim. But in a land where might often wore the crown, Littlefinger understood something more valuable than steel. Knowledge, influence, leverage. From the moment he set his ambitions upon the seat of Lannister power, he knew the greatest fortress in Westeros was not necessarily the one with the highest walls or the strongest gates. It was wherever people allowed themselves to be ruled by fear and assumption. And so he placed his foot on the path to Casterly Rock, determined to turn that great bastion of gold into an emblem of his own cunning, to crumble the walls with secrets rather than siege towers. He had never much cared for the Lannisters, their arrogance, their sense of entitlement, their preening pride that stank of old gold coins and fading lions. Let them rest in their illusions, he thought. Soon, he would wrap them up in those illusions until they could no longer discern a single truth about the world around them. He worked from the shadows, as always, sending out discreet letters with coded instructions to men and women who might never see each other's faces, or his. A Sellsword captain in the hills near the Golden Road received a purse far heavier than he was accustomed to. A former Lannister guard, now drunk and disillusioned, found new purpose and gold, delivered by a hooded courier who refused to give his name. Within the city of Lannisport, a merchant's widow, resentful at the neglect the Lannisters had shown her family, was quietly put on the payroll of the Baelish network. Each name, each discontent, each advantage was catalogued with meticulous care, forming a hidden scaffolding upon which Littlefinger would climb to the top. Every coin spent was an investment. Every smile or whispered confession was a thread woven into his grand tapestry of control. He moved with caution because caution had always served him well. Yet beneath his smooth, mocking grin, he was as eager as a cat preparing to pounce on an unsuspecting mouse. He had done what many thought impossible. Once, he had turned the War of the Five Kings to his advantage, scaling the heights of power in the capital by drawing a line of secrets from King's Landing all the way up to the Vale of Arryn. But the Vale was merely a secure fallback, a place to stash a gullible boylord and an army that might prove useful someday. Casterly Rock was something else entirely. If he could seize it, if he could pull the rock out from under Tywin's golden legacy, then the realms would truly understand that Petyr Baelish was not merely some cunning whisperer in the king's small council. He would stand among the most influential in Westeros, if not the most powerful outright. And so the game was set in motion. In King's Landing, few noticed his absences. Cersei Lannister, in her haughty confidence, believed she kept a keen watch on all those who might seek to undermine her. She had no love for Littlefinger, but she thought she had his measure. He was a sneaky, ambitious man, yes, but also one who understood the fine line of not overstepping his boundaries with the Queen Regent. She believed that she held him by his tail, letting him slink here or there to gather coin for the crown or orchestrate petty alliances. In truth, every time she turned her back, Littlefinger was forging new paths into the labyrinth of deals that would ultimately lead him to her family's seat of power. The best illusions, he knew, were the ones that gave your enemy precisely what they expected to see. So he drifted in and out of the royal court, always with a new rumor, a new piece of speculation, a new suggestion on how best to line the crown's coffers or broker a treaty in the Stormlands. He curried favor with men of small consequence, only to discard them once they had served their part in his design. He flattered those in higher positions, offering them secrets about the other lords, while carefully withholding the deeper truths of what he was planning. Meanwhile, gold trickled from the capital's treasury, funds that went unaccounted for by unwitting clerks or were buried amidst the chaos of a shifting, war-torn economy. What was a few thousand gold dragons compared to the cost of the Red Keep's endless renovation projects, or the millions spent to provision armies across the realm? A drop in the ocean, unnoticed by all but those who knew precisely where that drop was falling. And always, the financial currents found their way into Baelish's pockets, or out to the agents he had placed strategically around Casterly Rock. Lannisport was the key, he decided. The proud city below the great fortress was the pulse of Lannister wealth. So many ships, so many caravans, So many lines of commerce flowed through its docks and gates. If one could control Lannisport, or at least the hearts and minds of those who lived there, one could lay siege to Casterly Rock without necessarily raising a single battering ram. Sowing discontent among the merchants was easy enough. He pointed out how the Lannisters, preoccupied with the crown's affairs, were forgetting their loyal subjects in times of hardship. He spread rumors of new taxes, new levies, new demands on trade that would strangle the city's independence. He found smugglers willing to bring in arms and supplies, paying them with promises of exclusive rights once a new alliance took hold in the West. And, most crucially, he made certain every whisper was delivered in such a way that it never seemed to come from him. It was just talk on the wind, the sort of rumors that swirl in every tavern when war or famine is about. His manipulations did not go entirely unnoticed. Varys, the spider, had his little birds. While Varys no longer held the position he once did, his network had a way of surviving. There were momentary glances exchanged in the halls of the Red Keep, fleeting moments when Littlefinger would catch the eunuch's gaze, and a silent acknowledgement passed between them. They were two men who thrived in the darkness of secrets, each trying to guess how far the other would go. But as far as Varys might suspect Baelish of meddling in the West, no solid evidence presented itself. And the spider had other concerns, other factions to track. Littlefinger was grateful for that. The spider had an irritating habit of placing obstacles in the path of ambition. But perhaps even that could be twisted to his benefit. If Varys did catch on to his plan, maybe he would see an advantage in letting the Lannisters fall. Such were the intricacies of the great game. Step by step, coin by coin, betrayal by betrayal, a tapestry of deception was woven around Casterly Rock. The Lannisters themselves, ironically, contributed to their own unraveling. Queen Cersei's increasingly erratic governance in King's Landing and her insatiable need for gold to fund her personal guards, lavish feasts, and political gambles drained the family coffers. Meanwhile, rumors of Tommen's uncertain hold on the throne, the disquiet among the Tyrells, and the continued fracturing of alliances after the War of the Five Kings gave Littlefinger space to maneuver. Jaime Lannister was torn between his sense of duty and the knowledge that his family's power might be crumbling beneath him. That quiet dread made him vulnerable. Tyrion, the most cunning among them, had been driven away or was presumed dead or lost across the sea. Depending on the timeline one followed in that chaotic period. That left the Rock under the nominal oversight of a few Lannister cousins and lesser uncles, none of whom possessed Tywin's iron resolve or clear-headed leadership. There was Kevan Lannister once, but tragedy and treachery had removed him from the board. And so the Golden Fortress glowed with a false shine, the kind of brilliance that might blind enemies who looked only at its surface. Baelish was not blinded. He was enthralled. From the moment he first beheld the castle as a younger man, its towers carved from the rock face, the famous lion's mouth that served as the main gate, the labyrinth of mines and passages beneath, it had struck him as a marvel of power. But as with any grand structure, it was built by men, and men had weaknesses. There would be corridors that led to hidden places, guard shifts that could be bribed or blackmailed, petty resentments that could be inflamed. With enough time and a strategic advantage, it could be taken. The key was to make the Lannisters believe there was no threat. Littlefinger would not come with a great army. He would come quietly, as he always did, and by the time they realized what had happened, the gates would be shut from the inside. His first major piece in the field was a mercenary called Rudge One-Eye, an odd name for a man who was not, in fact, missing an eye. The rumor was that he simply liked the air of mystery it lent him. Rudge had served under the Bloody Mummers for a brief stint before they were scattered to the winds. He had no qualms about loyalty, no illusions of honor. He was a sellsword to the marrow, and that made him perfect for Baelish's designs. Rudge was tasked with gathering a small band of cutthroats and outlaws, men who had no place in polite society, and drifting into the outskirts of Lannisport. They were to cause small acts of disruption. A burnt warehouse, a few missing caravans, one or two kidnappings that never quite got solved. All of it pointed not at Baelish, but at some nebulous, rebellious group that believed the Lannisters had failed their people. The City Watch grew agitated. Families with even a hint of discontent were suspected, and tensions rose within the port city. Soon, fear and dissatisfaction became the talk of every marketplace. While that happened, Baelish traveled more frequently to the Vale, ensuring young Lord Robert Arryn's illusions of friendship remained intact. He brought the boy lord trifling gifts, indulged his tantrums, whispered sweet half-truths about how enemies abounded. At the same time, he quietly recruited knights from the Vale, men who had grown restless with the isolation that the Ares altitude enforced. He paid them well and promised them even greater rewards should they join him in a new cause. The key was to keep their presence subtle until the right moment. Baelish had learned from the chaos of the War of the Five Kings that large troop movements attracted far too many prying eyes. But a handful of well-trained knights here and there, especially if they traveled under the guise of pilgrimages or trade missions, would raise less suspicion. He also maintained a cordial facade with the Queen in King's Landing. He lavished compliments on Cersei, praising her beauty, her wisdom, while subtly fueling her paranoia about one threat or another. Whenever she demanded coin, he found ways to produce it. More loans from the Iron Bank or from wealthier lords in the Crownlands, forging new debts that eventually traced back to Baelish's hidden accounts. Each time, she thanked him without gratitude, then forgot him as soon as he left her presence. That was precisely how he wanted it. The more she took him for granted, the easier it would be to slip away unnoticed on his next journey west. And journey west he did, in secret, forging alliances with a few minor houses who resented the Lannisters' autocratic control of the region. The Farmans, the Marbrands, the Plum family. Some were willing to at least hear his subtle promises of a better arrangement. He did not need them all to commit, merely to hesitate when the moment came. A single hour's delay in sending reinforcements to Casterly Rock could be the difference between victory and defeat. The real artistry of his plan involved sowing a rift within the walls of Casterly Rock itself. He arranged for a series of letters to be discovered, each one hinting that certain stewards and guards had been shorted on their wages or were about to be replaced by men more loyal to King's Landing. Another letter implied that the lord in charge, one of the Lannister cousins, had gambled away part of the castle's treasury in a vain attempt to recoup lost funds. Bit by bit, the seeds of distrust were planted among the staff, so that no one was entirely sure who to blame for the fortress's apparent financial mismanagement. By the time the steward tried to reassure everyone that their wages were secure, a swirl of rumor had already reached the ears of the castle guards, the kitchen servants, the stable hands. Whispers spread that the fortress was in decline, that the Lannister name was on the brink of ruin. When a family that prided itself on overwhelming wealth was suspected of lacking it, the facade began to crack, just enough for the infiltration to begin. Littlefinger meticulously timed his next move. While chaos simmered in King's Landing due to yet another spat between the Faith and the Crown, he slipped away to personally oversee the operations around Lannisport. His presence was not known to most, as he traveled incognito with just a handful of loyal men, adopting the identity of a modest merchant dealing in exotic silks. He arranged a meeting with Rudge One-Eye in the basement of a battered inn on the outskirts of the city. There, by candlelight, they reviewed the state of local unrest. Rudge reported that several of the prominent merchant families were convinced the Lannisters would soon crack down on the city to make up for their own shortfalls. A spark was all that was needed to turn latent fear into open revolt. Baelish nodded, satisfied. The situation was exactly as he wanted it. However, an open revolt was not quite his plan. He didn't need Lannisport to burn. He needed it to be uncertain, to hesitate, to let him slip into Casterly Rock under the cover of confusion. The next phase involved forging letters that appeared to come from a minor branch of House Lannister, resentful of their cousin's hold on the rock and seeking to take it for themselves. These letters were delivered to city officials, who promptly marched to the castle to demand explanations. The argument that ensued caused the ruling Lannister cousin to grow suspicious of his own kin. In short order, the fortress's own guard was riven by internal tensions. Which side was plotting against the other? Who was loyal to the name of Lannister, and who was plotting to usurp the seat? During this period, Baelish put his next player on the board, a simple man named Dareth, who served as a steward within Casterly Rock itself. Dareth was not particularly bright, but he was scared and he had gambling debts, which made him the perfect pawn. He had been approached months prior, bribed, threatened, cajoled into loyalty to an unknown benefactor. Littlefinger, of course, operating behind multiple layers of anonymity. Dareth's orders were simple. Ensure that at a designated time, certain inner gates remained unlocked, and certain watch rotations were delayed. The complexities of how that might be accomplished were left to Dareth's imagination. But Baelish had ensured the steward had enough clout to carry out these tasks without drawing suspicion. As the day of reckoning approached, the steward's nerves frayed, but the cold reality of Baelish's threats kept him on track. Some men could be swayed by gold, others by fear. With Dareth, Littlefinger used both. The day arrived without fanfare. Dawn broke over the sea, lighting up the golden sheen of Casterly rock in a dazzling array of colors. Merchants bustled in Lannisport, uncertain but pressing on. A few of Baelish's mercenaries lurked around the city gates, ensuring the watch would be slow to respond if any strange commotions erupted in the castle. In the harbor, a ship discreetly lowered a small boat of armed men, fewer than 24. They wore mixed garb. Some looked like sailors, others like pilgrims. But at the heart of the group were several knights from the Vale, disguised in cloaks, their armor hidden beneath rough spun. They had not come to fight a pitched battle. They had come for a quick, surgical strike. Baelish was among them, wearing a hooded cloak that obscured his fine doublet. There was no bravado in his manner. He sat in the boat's prow, silent, eyes fixed on the great fortress looming above. He had orchestrated all of this with the delicacy of a harpist plucking strings, and now the final chord was about to be played. They made landfall at a discreet cove behind the city, where a rocky path snaked up toward the fortress's foundations. From there, they traveled on foot, slipping between craggy outcroppings, using old smugglers' trails that Baelish had learned of from his informants. Once or twice they encountered a lone sentry or a shepherd, but quick coin or a well-placed threat ensured no alarm was raised. Near midday, they reached the hidden postern gate that Dareth had been instructed to leave unbarred. As promised, it stood slightly ajar, the lock appearing intact but actually unlatched. Baelish glanced at Rudge, who gave a curt nod. So far, everything was in order. Slipping inside, they found themselves in a narrow corridor rarely used for anything but storage. As they crept along, the hum of castle life seeped through the walls. Servants scurrying with trays of food, distant clangs of steel as guards drilled in a courtyard, the echo of laughter from the great hall. All of it oblivious to the infiltration happening just beneath its nose. Dareth was waiting, sweating profusely, in a small storeroom. He nearly jumped out of his skin when Baelish's men appeared, but one look at their drawn blades steadied his resolve. In hushed, hurried tones, he confirmed that the Lannister cousin in command was in the Solar, meeting with city officials about the rumored revolt. The main guard contingent was on the eastern walls, apparently worried about potential unrest in the city. The path to the central keep was lightly guarded, and the men stationed there were more concerned about threats from outside. Perfect. Quietly, the group moved deeper into the castle. Baelish led the way, though he let Rudge and the Vale Knights flank him for protection. They encountered only a handful of guards. In each instance, bribes or swift violence dealt with the problem. Blood was shed, but it was minimal and the bodies were stashed out of sight. The infiltration was going remarkably smoothly. More than once, Baelish felt that familiar thrill of impending victory. It was a delicate moment. He had to quell his own excitement, remain calm. In war, boldness might grant you a moment's glory, but in politics, patience and precision were the keys to enduring triumph. At last, they reached the corridor leading to the Solar. Through a crack in the door, Baelish glimpsed the ruling Lannister cousin, a stout man with thinning gold hair, pacing back and forth as he argued with a city official. The official looked distressed, while a pair of castle guards stood at attention near the door. This was the tricky part. They couldn't just saunter in and demand the keys to the fortress. They needed a show of authority, something that would make the Lannisters' own people hesitate rather than immediately draw swords. And Baelish had just the plan for it. Signaling Rudge to hang back, Baelish smoothed his cloak, straightened his posture, and quietly told one of the Vale Knights to prepare for a swift, decisive entrance. Then he pushed the door open and stepped into the solar as though he belonged there. The Lannister cousin turned, startled, hand already going to the hilt of his sword. The city official blinked in confusion. The guard stiffened, eyes darting between Baelish and the intruder's cloak, which now parted to reveal not a merchant's attire but something more refined. Littlefinger's lips parted into that serpentine smile he had perfected over the years. "My lord," Baelish began, his tone dripping with confidence and a hint of mock deference, "I bring word from Her Grace the Queen Regent." That single statement gave the Lannister cousin pause. Cersei had not mentioned sending anyone. Before he could demand an explanation, Baelish took another step forward, producing a rolled parchment with the royal seal, albeit a forged one, but of such exquisite craftsmanship that only an expert would doubt its authenticity. "I regret that certain urgent matters prevented me from delivering this earlier," he said. "But you must know that your position here is under scrutiny. The Queen fears betrayal from those closest to her. We cannot allow the rock to fall into disloyal hands." He flicked his eyes toward the guards, as if implying they might be among those suspect. The seeds of paranoia already planted in this fortress did the rest of the work for him. The cousin's face flushed with indignation. "Nonsense. We are loyal. Who dares?" The door opened again, and the Vale Knights spilled in, swords drawn, along with Rudge's men. The guards in the solar hesitated, uncertain whether to fight or stand aside. Then Baelish, with a smoothness befitting a court performer, declared, "In the name of the Iron Throne, I hereby take custodianship of Casterly Rock, pending a full investigation of alleged treachery. Lay down your arms and you will be treated with the respect your station deserves. Resist and you will be considered traitors." It was a brilliant gambit, using the Queen's name and the specter of suspicion to cow them. The cousin, outraged, tried to splutter a denial, but the city official looked terrified and quickly surrendered. The guards, confused and fearful of being labeled traitors, lowered their weapons. Baelish, controlling the room with ease, stepped up to the Lannister cousin. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," he murmured, loud enough for the others to hear. "I have a large force outside these walls, ready to act if necessary. The Queen wants no bloodshed, but she will not tolerate dissent." The lie was so beautifully told that even some of Baelish's own men almost believed it. And it was enough. The Lannister cousin's shoulders sagged. He had no real authority to stand against a direct command from King's Landing, not when he was already paranoid about potential familial betrayal and rumored shortfalls in the treasury. Reluctantly, he removed his sword belt and handed it over, stammering about the loyalty of House Lannister. Rudge's men swiftly took the guards into custody. The city official, now quite convinced that something dire was afoot, stumbled out of the solar to inform the rest of the staff that the Queen's man had arrived to take control. By the time anyone thought to question the authenticity of Baelish's documents or wonder why there was no large royal force outside, the infiltration would have reached the castle's key points. And so, within an hour, Littlefinger's men seized the armory, the barracks, and the gatehouse. The few loyal Lannister guards who tried to resist were swiftly overpowered. Some died in brief skirmishes, but the vast majority surrendered, overwhelmed by confusion and fear. Before nightfall, Baelish stood in the high hall of Casterly Rock, gazing upon the gilded lions that adorned its walls. He felt an electric thrill course through him. He, Peter Baelish, son of a minor lord from the Fingers, now commanded the seat of House Lannister. It was not a formality, not a temporary arrangement, at least not in his mind. He had claimed the very symbol of Lannister power. The realization dawned on him like a gentle sunrise. He was now the rock upon which the kingdoms would break if they defied him. Not everyone in the fortress bent so easily. A small pocket of resistance formed in the western tower, led by a hardened knight who had once served directly under Tywin. This knight refused to acknowledge Baelish's authority, Queen's seal or not. He and a group of loyal guards barricaded themselves, prepared to die fighting for Lannister honor. Word reached Baelish of this defiance, and for a moment, he weighed the cost of sending men to storm the tower. Bloodshed was not the ideal scenario. He preferred to win with minimal violence, controlling hearts and minds through fear and cunning. But an example might be necessary, lest others think to rise against him once they realized the Queen's edict was a fabrication. He sent Rudge One-Eye to parley with them to offer terms. The knight cursed Baelish's name, denouncing him as a usurper. So Rudge responded in the only language the Sellsword knew: brutality. He ordered the tower's doors battered open, and his men surged in. Screams echoed in the corridors. By the time it was over, the floors were slick with blood. The knight died with a sword in his hand, cursing the name Littlefinger with his final breath. No quarter was given to the others. Rudge had a penchant for cruelty that made Baelish mildly uncomfortable, but it was effective. When word of the slaughter spread, the castle folk realized resistance was futile. The fortress belonged to Baelish now. Any further challenge would end just as harshly. That evening, Baelish sat in the Lord's Solar, once the domain of the Lannisters, now draped in the hush that follows a swift takeover. He dined on a modest meal of roasted fowl and fresh bread while a steward, one of his coerced pawns, poured wine. Sitting at the massive table, he ran his fingers across the polished wood and thought of Tywin Lannister, that stern old lion who had once been the terror of the realm. Tywin had turned the rock into a symbol of power that no one dared challenge. Yet here sat Petyr Baelish, unassuming and cunning, who had taken it through stealth and subterfuge. He allowed himself a small laugh, marveling at the improbable path that had led him here. However, claiming a fortress and holding it were two different tasks. Baelish had no illusions that the Lannisters, scattered though they might be, would simply accept this. Cersei, once she learned of this betrayal, would be apoplectic with rage, and if Jaime still held any measure of power, he would undoubtedly rally forces to attempt to retake their ancestral seat. Baelish needed to consolidate his control quickly. That meant securing the loyalty or at least the compliance of the local houses and ensuring that Lannisport fell in line. It also meant preparing for the possibility of siege or an armed assault from the outside. The next day, he summoned the steward who oversaw the castle's finances, demanding an accounting of the gold reserves. The steward, trembling, explained that much of the wealth had been transferred to King's Landing in recent years to fund the crown's wars and debts. Yet there were still significant stores of gold in the deeper mines. Baelish ordered the steward to show him everything. Down into the bowels of the rock they went, through torchlit tunnels where veins of precious metal still gleamed in the stone. Baelish's mind whirled with possibilities. If he could tap these reserves, he could fund an army of his own, buy loyalties across Westeros, perhaps even repay the Iron Bank to gain their favor against the crown. He was still a usurper in the eyes of many, but gold had a wondrous way of turning enemies into hesitant friends. Securing Lannisport, however, would require a more delicate approach. The city lay under the direct influence of Casterly Rock, but its people were proud, and they had grown agitated by all the rumors and disruptions. If Baelish marched in with a heavy hand, he risked provoking open revolt. On the other hand, he needed to ensure they recognized his authority. So he penned a proclamation, forging the Queen Regent's signature again, stating that Petyr Baelish had been granted the title of Lord Paramount of the Westerlands in light of recent revelations of disloyalty among certain members of House Lannister. It was audacious, laughably so, but he counted on the confusion in King's Landing to buy him time. He also sweetened the deal for Lannisport by pledging reduced taxes on trade and a special set of privileges for local merchants. If they supported his claim, they would prosper. If they resisted, well, they had just seen what happened in the Western Tower. Dispatching a small contingent of Vale Knights and reliable mercenaries to the city, Baelish hoped to assert a quiet presence rather than an occupation. He instructed his men to avoid unnecessary violence, to show courtesy, and to spread the rumor that Baelish had come to protect the city from the crown's oppressive tax demands. Having sown these seeds of rumor in advance, he knew many residents would be inclined to believe it. Word soon reached him that the city's council was willing to parley, though tensions remained high. Day by day, coin and cunning chipped away at resistance. Slowly, Lannisport began to accept the new order, or at least learn to live with it. Behind the scenes, Baelish also struck deals with certain unscrupulous captains who roamed the western seas. He promised them profitable contracts if they would harass any fleet that came to retake Casterly Rock on behalf of the Lannisters or their allies. This was a gamble. He might end up with a fleet of pirates more loyal to gold than any banner. But that suited Baelish's purposes perfectly. He wanted no illusions of chivalry or grand loyalty. He wanted men who could be bought because bought men could be controlled. Better that than relying on the feudal obligations of knights who might turn against him if they decided he was less legitimate than the Lannisters. In the shifting sands of Westerosi politics, Baelish found mercenaries and brigands often more predictable. Amid these maneuvers, letters flew by raven across the Seven Kingdoms. Some to the Eyrie, where Baelish maintained a measure of control through young Robert Arryn, urging the Vale Lords to prepare for any call to arms. Others to the Crownlands, giving spurious reassurances to Cersei that all was well and that Baelish was tirelessly working to strengthen the crown's hold on the Westerlands. Each letter was carefully phrased to deceive, to delay. He counted on the fact that the crown was beset by so many crises: unrest in the city, tensions with the Faith Militant, threats from Dorne, and the uncertain alliances with Highgarden, that they would not dispatch a large force to the west without verifying the situation. By the time they realized what had happened, Baelish intended to be firmly entrenched, with strong walls and strong coffers. Still, the question remained, what of the principal Lannisters themselves? News traveled slowly in war-torn lands, but eventually, a raven arrived bearing word that Jaime Lannister, fresh from some campaign or another, had learned of the seizure of Casterly Rock. He was said to be furious, vowing to reclaim his home. Others claimed Jaime was so disillusioned that he simply wandered the realm in a state of bitter despair, unsure how to rectify yet another catastrophic blow to the family name. Meanwhile, Queen Cersei's reaction was rumored to be cataclysmic. She raged in the Red Keep, demanding immediate retribution, scouring the city for any of Baelish's known associates. Many of his lesser agents who had lingered in King's Landing found themselves arrested or executed, their tongues cut out before they could speak truths or lies. Cersei made it known that she would see Baelish flayed alive. She was convinced he had not acted alone, that someone else must be aiding him. But her tenuous grip on power in the capital limited her ability to respond effectively. She was entangled with enemies on all sides, and the gold she might have used to raise an army had bled away. As for Tyrion, the imp, if he still lived across the sea, it remained to be seen whether he would muster some effort to save the family seat, or if he would quietly celebrate Baelish's blow to the siblings who had once tormented him. Within Casterly Rock, Baelish settled into the role of lord. He replaced key positions with people loyal to him, some from his old networks, others from the ranks of local folk who could be bought or who feared retribution. The gold mines, while not inexhaustible, provided enough wealth to keep mercenaries paid, to bribe potential troublemakers, and to invest in small improvements that won the favor of the castle's staff and Lannisport's merchants. He knew his hold on power was precarious. It was built on illusions and half-truths as much as on coin. But illusions, he mused, were the most solid currency in the political arena. If enough people believed he was rightful lord and that the crown sanctioned his rule, that belief itself would become reality, at least for a time. He took care to limit Rudge One-Eye's brutality, instructing him only to use force when absolutely necessary. The Sellsword chafed at these constraints but obeyed as long as Baelish's gold kept flowing. At the same time, Baelish consulted regularly with the Vale Knights, ensuring they felt valued and reminding them that once the situation was stabilized, they would reap grand rewards. He had them drill with the Lannister guards who had not been dismissed, forging a new garrison that might at least put up a decent fight if an external threat materialized. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Raven after raven flew, bringing tidings of the realm's instability. There was talk of new pretenders, of old grudges flaring up in the Riverlands, of ironborn raiders testing the coasts. The war had left Westeros fractured, and that fracturing gave Baelish a chance to solidify his position. Almost no one wanted to risk a full-scale war just to restore the Lannisters to their castle. especially if it meant tangling with a cunning opportunist who now held the purse strings of the gold mines. Gradually, the improbable became accepted. Petyr Baelish had taken Casterly Rock, and House Lannister was powerless to remove him. Yet Baelish's ambitions, as always, stretched beyond mere possession. He began to style himself not only as the Lord of Casterly Rock, but as a prospective Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, forging alliances with smaller houses who had grown resentful under Lannister dominance. Some complied out of genuine relief to see a shift in power, others did so grudgingly, preferring to keep their heads attached to their shoulders. Quietly, Baelish commissioned discreet inquiries to the Iron Bank, offering partial repayment of the crown's debts if they would cease funding any Lannister-led effort to retake the rock. The Iron Bank, eternally pragmatic, was open to negotiations. Gold was gold, after all. In King's Landing, the political situation roiled. Cersei, in her fury, demanded the lords of Westeros unify against this vile betrayal. But few answered the call with enthusiasm, for none had ever truly loved the Lannisters. The Tyrells were content to watch a rival house suffer humiliation. The Martells of Dorne had their own vendettas, and the North was in no position to help, embroiled in its own struggles after the Red Wedding's fallout. Even the Baratheon name, carried by Stannis or others, was scattered and uncertain. So Cersei's shrieks of war largely fell on deaf ears. She sent a small force westward, but it was harassed by brigands and turned back due to insufficient provisions. Each misstep further weakened her authority. Rumors circulated that the king himself, young Tommen, was conflicted, not understanding how his mother had allowed this to happen. Jaime Lannister, at last, tried to muster support from what remained of the Lannister loyalists. He marched with a modest army of sworn bannermen, hoping that the name of Lannister would inspire fealty. But Baelish had prepared well. He had paid off several of the banner houses to stay neutral. Others he had threatened into compliance. When Jaime arrived in the Westerlands, he found fewer allies than he'd expected. In a desperate move, he tried to lay siege to Casterly Rock with what forces he had. But as soon as they approached the fortress, Baelish's garrison rained down arrows, and Lannisport's city guard, now under Baelish's control, closed the gates behind them, blocking any chance for supplies or reinforcements. Jaime's men found themselves outmaneuvered, pinned between impregnable walls and an unwelcoming city. Without the funds or the allies to sustain a protracted siege, Jaime had to retreat, his heart weighed down by shame. He had grown used to losing things he cared about: his hand, his father's respect, perhaps even his sister's unwavering love. But to lose Casterly Rock was a blow that cut him to the core. For Baelish, every retreat of a Lannister force was a victory etched in golden letters. He seized the moment, sending out lavish gifts and letters to the local lords, inviting them to feast in the Great Hall of the Rock. A cunning host, he offered them the chance to see the wealth still abundant beneath the fortress, praising them for their wisdom in supporting him. For those who balked, a subtle threat awaited. The same bloody purge that had consumed the Western Tower could visit their own keeps if they resisted. Most came to heal, if only to safeguard their positions. And thus Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, became the unspoken tyrant of the Westerlands, cloaking his tyranny in politeness, gold, and the veneer of official sanction. In private, he often reflected on what Tywin Lannister would say if the old lion could see what had become of his legacy. Perhaps Tywin would roar, or perhaps he would admire the cunning it took to dismantle a house's power from within. Baelish imagined the latter, and the thought amused him. Even the mightiest lords could be outfoxed by a man who understood how to bend perceptions. However, holding a seat of power came with its own set of perils. As time passed, Baelish found himself targeted by would-be assassins. Some were hired by Cersei, others by disgruntled Lannister loyalists or even opportunists seeking a quick route to wealth. A few attempts came dangerously close to success: a poisoner among the kitchen staff, a crossbowman who got within a hair's breadth during a courtyard stroll. Baelish responded by tightening security. Trust grew scarce, and the once grand corridors of Casterly Rock took on a tense, watchful atmosphere. Eyes lurked in every shadow, and the staff learned not to speak ill of their new lord within earshot of any corridor or courtyard. Still, Baelish relished the challenge. He had never been one to rest easily. Power was an addiction, and each day he woke within the fortress, with the lion sigils replaced by his personal mockingbird banner in certain corners, fed his appetite for control. He made occasional visits to Lannisport, strolling the docks in disguise, listening to the common folk mutter about the new regime. Some were surprisingly content, trade had picked up, and Baelish was more interested in making coin than punishing the city. Others quietly yearned for the return of Lannister rule, but fear kept them in check. So long as he balanced gold and terror, Baelish believed he could maintain his grip. Far away, in the capital, the realm churned with rumors. Whispers reached the Red Keep that Baelish had discovered vast new veins of gold, that he was using them to buy sellsword companies in Essos, that he planned to declare himself king of the Westerlands if the Iron Throne did not recognize his authority. Desperate for revenue and fraught with turmoil, the crown found itself in a precarious position. Could they afford to wage war against the man who now effectively controlled the largest gold mine? In Westeros, the Queen Regent raged, but each time she tried to act, she collided with the harsh reality of a near-empty treasury and fractious lords. Meanwhile, Baelish's spies in King's Landing kept him informed of her every move. If she so much as mustered a significant force, he would know well in advance, giving him time to fortify or strike a deal. Yet no position is ever truly unassailable. As Baelish's rule lengthened, new cracks appeared. The populace of the Westerlands, proud and stubborn, began to resent the foreigner who held their ancestral seat. Some local bannermen, though cowed, secretly conspired to restore Lannister rule. They reached out to Jaime, who remained near the region, gathering strength in a more clandestine manner. They also probed for alliances with other great houses, hoping someone would see advantage in dethroning Baelish. Littlefinger's own men, especially the mercenaries, grew restless. Men who are paid to fight grow expensive over time, and the illusions of an endless gold mine might falter if real production did not keep pace with rumored abundance. Baelish was forced to regularly send parties into the mines, ensuring the flow of gold remained steady enough to pay for his networks of spies and soldiers. Each time, he worried that a sudden collapse or a shortage might unravel his carefully woven tapestry. One chilly night, as Baelish pored over ledgers detailing mine outputs and mercenary contracts, a messenger arrived bearing a sealed letter. The seal was unknown to him, a stylized hawk in flight. Curious, Baelish broke it open to discover a brief note. "Lord Baelish, we have matters to discuss regarding your new seat and the future of the Vale. Secrets can be as dangerous as gold. Meet us at the place you once called home." No signature, but the reference to the Vale was enough to set his mind churning. He suspected it might be a faction of Vale lords who were uneasy about his long absence, or perhaps a threat from some unknown corner. Either way, it was a reminder that power in Westeros was never absolute. One must perpetually look over one's shoulder for the next dagger in the dark. Thus, Baelish weighed his options. Attend the meeting, possibly walking into a trap, or ignore it and risk missing a valuable opportunity. His instincts had served him well so far, guiding him to improbable heights. He decided to investigate further, dispatching a few discreet ravens to his contacts in the Vale, hoping to learn more about who had sent the letter. He also increased the watch around Casterly Rock, doubling the guard in crucial areas, in case this was a ploy to draw him out and retake the fortress in his absence. In the days that followed, as he awaited replies, he continued to cultivate the facade of an unchallenged lord. He hosted lavish dinners for visiting trade envoys, assured local houses of the stability he offered, and quietly spread rumors in King's Landing that a bold new era of cooperation was dawning in the West. Yet beneath his courteous smiles and masked politeness, the tension inside him grew. He felt like a man balancing on a sword's edge. One misstep, and the carefully assembled puzzle of bribes, alliances, and deceptions would crumble, leaving him a hunted man. When the ravens returned, they brought mixed news. One letter from the Vale indicated that a small faction of nobles, led by Lord Nestor Royce, was growing uneasy about Baelish's continued grip on young Robert Arryn and the Vale. Another letter hinted that certain lords might be open to an arrangement that acknowledged Baelish's holdings in the west if he relinquished some influence in the Vale. None of it directly matched the hawk seal that had arrived unbidden. This mystery messenger remained unidentified. All the while, unrest among the Westerland's lords simmered. Grumblings about a foreign meddler clung to the halls of local keeps. Baelish deftly navigated these tensions, but he knew that every day he remained in Casterly Rock, the Lannisters would keep scheming to reclaim their seat. Perhaps it was only a matter of time before they found a way to rally enough men and resources to tear him down. In a private moment, he studied the Lannister banners that still hung in parts of the castle. He had considered removing them entirely, replacing them with his Mockingbird sigil. But he decided against it. Let the Golden Lion remain visible, a reminder to the populace that the old regime was not fully dead, and that he was unafraid to inhabit its symbol. The notion amused him. He considered the intricacies of forging a false marriage alliance, perhaps wedding himself to some distant Lannister cousin to legitimize his hold. But that path was fraught with unpredictable consequences. Instead, he penned a letter to the Citadel, requesting they send a maester who would publicly affirm that Baelish's new lordship had been decreed by the crown. Lies built on lies, until the world forgot what had once been true. Winter crept closer, storms battered the coasts, and still Baelish held the rock. Word eventually reached him that the Queen Regent had burned through most of her political capital in King's Landing trying to mount an expedition to retake it, only to be rebuffed by lords who saw no profit in yet another war. He was winning, if one could call it that, but a small corner of his heart knew that every day he dwelled in the fortress was another day his enemies plotted. There would come a reckoning, for power is the most coveted prize in the Seven Kingdoms, and a single man can hold it only so long before a sharper mind or a sharper sword takes it away. Yet if Petyr Baelish had anything to say about it, that day of reckoning would not come until he had bent the Westerlands, the Vale, and perhaps even the Iron Throne itself to his will. He was no king, no knight, no shining hero. He was merely a man who understood that in a world defined by illusions, those who mastered illusions held the real power. He had seized Casterly Rock not through armies but through cunning. The lion had been ensnared by the Mockingbird, and all the realm watched in disbelief. He allowed himself a small smile as he gazed out from the highest balcony, overlooking the rocky cliffs and the pounding sea below. The wind whipped at his cloak. Far below, the lights of Lannisport flickered. He could almost taste the salt in the air. This was not the view he had grown up with in the Fingers, nor was it the Red Keep's silhouette. It was something entirely different, a vantage point from which he could glimpse the endless possibilities spread out before him like the open sea. And in that moment, with the Golden Fortress under his command, Petyr Baelish believed he might shape the future of Westeros itself, one silent betrayal at a time. He knew he would not be unchallenged. The lion's roar still echoed in the distance, and the ghosts of Tywin's legacy would not rest quietly. Jaime lurked, Cersei raged, and perhaps even Tyrion might return with a vengeance. But for now, the seat of House Lannister was his. Let the kingdom reel. Let the old powers quake. Petyr Baelish, the Mockingbird, had taken the lion's den, and from here, perched at the top of this golden rock, he imagined he could see 1,000 moves ahead in the great game he had been playing his entire life. He stood on the highest balcony of Casterly Rock and let the wind whip his cloak as he gazed down into the vastness below. In the moonlight, the craggy face of the ancient fortress glimmered faintly, like the gold veins still rumored to be hidden in its deepest mines. Night cloaked the far-off city of Lannisport in a hush, dotted by hundreds of lanterns shimmering along its streets and harbor. All of it lay under his grasp, the rock that had once been the pride and power of House Lannister, the merchant city that depended upon it, the mines that could buy the loyalty of mercenaries and foreign banks alike. Yet Petyr Baelish knew better than any man alive that power, so precariously won, was also perilously kept. He turned away from the edge, sliding smoothly back into the solar. The room had belonged to Tywin Lannister once, then to lesser Lannister cousins after Tywin's death and the subsequent disasters that had befallen the family. Now it was Littlefinger's, at least for as long as he could maintain this delicate deception. A single candle burned on a polished wooden table, illuminating a spread of parchments, half-sealed letters and ledgers. Shadows of lion motifs danced on the walls, each flicker a reminder of the specter haunting these halls. A single cup of wine remained untouched at the table's edge. Baelish took a sip, allowing the dryness of the red to settle on his tongue, then placed the goblet down. Tonight, restlessness roiled within him, a sense that the noose of consequences might soon tighten. His improbable seizure of Casterly Rock had thrust the entire realm into a state of disbelief, but disbelief would inevitably transform into action. Jaime Lannister had already made one ill-fated attempt to retake his family seat. A second attempt was almost certain. Cersei Lannister, in King's Landing, ranted and raged about retribution. Her madness and diminishing influence at court had not yet produced the catastrophic backlash Baelish had feared, but that could change at any moment if the right alliances formed. He closed his eyes, letting the flicker of the candlelight etch bright patterns in his mind. Planning had always been his solace. From the earliest days in the Fingers, with nothing to his name but a minor lordship, he had realized that cunning and illusions were the weapons he could wield. Where men wore armor and clashed swords, he wove networks of rumor and coin, pulling the threads together to manipulate those who considered themselves far more powerful. The entire scheme to topple the Lannisters from within had been years in the making, each bribe and whisper laid with the precision of a mason fitting stones into a wall. Outside, a faint scuff of boots on stone alerted him to the presence of Rudge One Eye. The Sellsword, who still had both eyes, ironically, was loyal only insofar as Baelish's gold kept him so. But his ruthless efficiency had proven invaluable in securing the rock. Baelish did not trust him exactly, but he found the man predictable. That was almost as good. A knock sounded. Baelish beckoned Rudge inside. The mercenary's scarred face and misleading eye patch gave him a savage air, and his voice came out in a low rasp. "My lord, you should know that a messenger arrived from Lannisport. A short fellow, claims he has urgent business with you about the city's shipping regulations. Could be a ploy." Baelish nodded and glanced at the hourglass on the side of the table. "Show him in shortly. Have him searched, of course. I'm in no mood for a crossbow bolt tonight." Rudge made a half-salute, half-bow gesture, then withdrew. Since the night Baelish had claimed Casterly Rock, attempts on his life had nearly become routine. Poisoners in the kitchens, assassins sneaking past watchful sentries, even a bribed stable hand who tried to sever the straps on his horse's saddle. None had succeeded. Most attempts lacked subtlety, which was a small blessing. And so far, Baelish's layers of security had proved sufficient. Alone again, he steeled himself. Each day he waited was another day for his enemies to organize. But to yield the fortress now would be to relinquish the greatest triumph of his life. He intended to hold it, or at least drain it of its wealth until it was no longer worth retaking. In his quiet moments, he wondered if he should strip the rock bare of gold and slip away to Essos, vanishing like a wraith. But the thought of leaving Westeros, leaving the game behind, filled him with a hollow sense of loss. He had fought too hard, climbed too far, to abandon the board now. He returned to the balcony door and stood in the threshold, the night air cold against his cheeks. Below, the fortress's courtyards were lit by scattered torches, each held by a guard who reported to him. The stables, the gatehouse, the armory, every corner was controlled by men he had personally vetted or paid. The once resplendent House Lannister staff still carried out their duties, but under watchful eyes and with halting obedience. The name Lannister carried an aura of power, yet it was crumbling beneath the mockingbird's weight. Somewhere beyond these walls, the last true heirs of Tywin's line plotted. Baelish knew that Jaime, never the most politically astute lion, had turned more cautious after his humiliating attempt to breach the rock. Rumor said he was rallying smaller forces, forging quiet pacts with the gold-laden houses that still burned with loyalty to the lion sigil. Or perhaps he was looking for another route, a weakness in Baelish's plan. There was always a weakness, though Baelish took pains to mask it. Then there was Cersei, her fury scorching the Red Keep. Every so often, a raven would arrive bearing new threats couched in official language, demanding his immediate surrender. Of course, he never responded. He simply had them stored in a locked chest, one more trove of secrets for potential use in the future. At length, he heard Rudge returning with the visitor. Baelish left the balcony and resumed his seat at the table, swirling his wine idly to mask his tension. When Rudge opened the door, the short fellow turned out to be a barrel-chested merchant in fine attire, bright rings flashing on his fingers. The guards had clearly confiscated his cloak, for he stood in plain doublet and breeches, glancing around anxiously. "My lord, Lord Baelish," the merchant began, his voice trembling slightly. He bowed. Too deeply, Baelish noted, and then flicked his eyes toward the sellsword. "I come with messages from the harbor master of Lannister." Rudge drew closer to the merchant, as though daring him to attempt any treachery. Baelish made a small, dismissive gesture. "You may leave us, Rudge. Wait outside in case our friend here has ill intentions. But I suspect he's more interested in coin than blood." With a grunt, the sellsword left, closing the door behind him. Now Baelish studied the merchant closely. He was short, yes, but not dwarfish, with a thick beard and darting eyes that hinted at an aversion to direct confrontation. Baelish gestured for him to speak. The merchant cleared his throat, stepping forward. "My lord, the harbormaster regrets to inform you that shipments to the Reach are being detained unless they carry the proper Lannister seal. This is problematic, as you know. The men in the city aren't sure whose authority truly commands the docks. Some say the Queen Regent in King's Landing demands the lion's share of fees. Others hear that you intend to lower the taxes. There's confusion, and confusion leads to losses." He wiped at his brow. "We need clarity." Baelish took a measured sip of wine before answering. "You will have clarity when I decide the city is prepared to follow my instructions. If the harbormaster is so anxious, let him come to me directly for an audience. In the meantime, I trust you have some suggestion." The merchant's nervousness turned to eagerness. "Lower the fees. That will ensure trade flourishes, and the crown might be slow to react to a sudden revenue drop so far from King's Landing. A temporary measure, but a profitable one for everyone involved. And then you could." Baelish raised a hand, silencing him. "The crown's eyes are turned upon me already, friend. A precipitous drop in revenue might well spur the royal forces to swift action, forced or otherwise. Still, your suggestion is noted. Return to the harbormaster and tell him that shipping fees will be cut by a fraction, enough to encourage trade, but not so much as to alarm the Iron Throne. Let us say a reduction of 1 part in 5. If he handles matters carefully, we will find a workable balance. Does that satisfy him?" A broad grin split the merchant's face as he bowed. "Yes, my lord, very much so. He's been eager for that news. We all are. Then go, and ensure that rumor of this arrangement doesn't spread beyond the docks. I have no desire to see half the realm suddenly converge on Lannisport, hoping to exploit new trade benefits." The merchant bowed again, so low that Baelish thought he might tip forward onto his nose. Then he backed out of the solar and disappeared, escorted by Rudge. Left alone once more, Baelish allowed himself a small, satisfied sigh. Every day, a dozen small negotiations like that one took place, each with the potential to tip his precarious rule in one direction or another. That was the nature of his game. A constant balancing act, 1,000 cunning bargains stacked upon each other like a tower built on shifting sands. He finished the wine, though it had turned bitter in his mouth. Rising from the table, he moved to the window. Stars glimmered above the battlements. Each star a possible destiny, he mused, or a fragment of the illusions he wove. Once again, that restlessness returned. He would not sleep easily tonight. Morning found him in the depths of the castle, descending torchlit stairways into a corridor that led to the mines. A Lannister steward, a thin, haggard man named Harrys, guided him. The tunnels smelled of damp stone and coal smoke from the forges deeper within. By the time they reached the bottom level, the torch flickered wildly, pushing back shadows that crouched in the corners like ghosts of the rock's past masters. Harry's paused in front of a heavy wooden door bound with iron. A pair of guards, each wearing a mockingbird pin on their cloaks, straightened at the sight of Baelish. He gestured for them to open the door, and they did so, revealing a low-ceilinged chamber where raw gold ore was brought up from the mine shafts to be assessed, smelted, and accounted for. Inside, a small group of miners huddled around a table, rifling through ledgers and piles of ore. At the head of this group stood Dareth. The anxious steward Baelish had planted here before the takeover. Dareth's face was pale, beaded with perspiration. When he noticed Baelish, he hastily bowed, nearly knocking over an inkwell. "My lord," Dareth said, trying to catch his breath. I've compiled the latest yield figures. The new shafts we excavated have produced less than we hoped." He hesitated, tapping a ledger. "The veins near the western face appear to be running thin. The deeper we go, the more labor and timber we need to prevent collapses. The cost is significant." Baelish accepted the ledger, flipping through pages of careful sums. He read quickly, comparing the numbers to older records. The margin of profit was declining, though it remained substantial enough for now. Still, it was a reminder that no mine could produce endlessly. Even the famed gold of Casterly rock was not inexhaustible. "Set aside the new shafts for the moment," Baelish said. "Focus on the older sections that still yield reliably. I'd rather secure moderate gains for a longer period than risk collapse for a few sudden spurts of profit. We can rotate labor crews, reduce the load on the less stable tunnels." Dareth visibly relaxed, nodding. "Yes, my lord, that will reduce immediate yields, but it's safer." "Safety ensures survival, Dareth," Baelish replied, "and survival ensures that these mines will keep feeding my coffers. In the meantime, see to it that the men are paid on time. Nothing encourages sabotage faster than delayed wages." "Yes, my lord, of course." Baelish lingered, his gaze drifting over lumps of or stacked in crates. He imagined each chunk turned into coins stamped with the Lannister lion. For now, he lacked the authority to mint currency with the Mocking IRD sigil. That would be too blatant a challenge to the Iron Throne. Perhaps one day, if he grew bold enough, or if the realm's fracturing gave him free rein, he might do exactly that. "How many barrels of processed ore are we sending up each week?" he asked Dareth. The steward consulted a separate ledger. "We aim for 20, though last week we only managed 17. Baelish did some mental calculations. Each barrel, once refined, could fund a modest mercenary company for several months, or pay for information from half the spies in the Crownlands. Enough gold could bring entire houses to heel if properly distributed. Enough gold could also bring entire armies if it came to war. He pressed his lips together, considering how quickly the flow of coin might slow if the mines became more dangerous to exploit. "This will do," he said at last. "Maintain consistency, and keep me informed of any changes." With that, he spun on his heel and left, Harry's trailing behind. The steward guided him through the winding corridors until they re-emerged in a wide passage lit by lanterns. At the far end of the hallway, a set of heavy doors led to a storeroom. 2 mercenaries stood watch, but when they saw Baelish, they stepped aside. Inside, Baelish beheld an ample collection of crates, some full of salted meat, others of grain, dried fruits, and barrels of fresh water. Slowly, he circled the storeroom, letting his fingers run over the crates. "Supplies for a siege," he murmured. "How quickly can we double this stock, if needed?" Harry's blinked. "Double, my lord? We'd need an influx of goods from the surrounding farmland, or from Lannisport. But the farmland is still somewhat ravaged from the last war. And Lannisport's merchants, they'll require incentives." Baelish's smile held no warmth. "I'm aware. Do what you must. Coin or intimidation or both. I'd rather have too many provisions than risk a shortage if Jaime Lannister or another force attempts a prolonged siege." Harry's bowed his head. "Yes, my lord. I'll coordinate with the quartermasters." "Good. See that you do. You may go." The steward hurried out, leaving Baelish alone among the crates and barrels. He inhaled deeply, breathing in the stale scent of salted pork and old wood. Such a mundane scene, yet it was as vital to his hold on power as all the secret deals and bribes. Men might fear him or desire gold, but hunger would drive them to rebellion if he failed to feed them in the event of war. Casterly Rock's famed impregnability could become a tomb if supplies ran low. He returned to the upper levels in time for a midday meal, taking it alone in a smaller dining hall that overlooked the sea. Once, the Lannisters would have filled this hall with courtiers and visiting dignitaries, the table groaning under platters of rich meats and exotic fruits. Now, Baelish sat at a modest spread, roasted fish, fresh bread, and a thin gravy. A few guards lingered near the arched windows, watchful. He barely tasted the food. His mind churned with strategies. How to undermine whatever alliances Jaime might forge, how to preempt any move from King's Landing. He needed to keep his finger on the pulse of politics beyond the Westerlands. Knowledge had always been his most potent weapon. Yet the channels of information were far less secure now that he'd stationed himself in the rock. Varys's little birds were still out there, listening, singing. The spider might be feeding Cersei or Jaime details of Baelish's vulnerabilities, or playing an even deeper game. Baelish knew the eunuch's modus operandi too well to be complacent. He considered dispatching an envoy to the Vale, where young Lord Robert Arryn still nominally looked to Baelish for guidance. The Vale had largely stayed out of the war since Baelish consolidated power there. If he could bring the Vale's knights westward, it would form a bulwark no Lannister loyalist could hope to breach. But that risked exposing the Vale to infiltration, or turning the Vale lords against him. They had tolerated him so far, but how would they react to a large-scale move supporting an open usurping of the Westerlands? Baelish wasn't entirely sure. The memory of that mysterious hawk-sealed letter returned to him. He had not discovered who sent it, nor dared to act upon it yet. "Meet us at the place you once called home," it had said. If that home meant the Eyrie, or the modest tower in the Fingers, or even King's Landing, he could not say. Too much risk, too little clarity. He had chosen to ignore it for now, but it preyed on his mind. Could it be a lure to coax him away from Casterly Rock? Or might it be an offer from an unexpected ally? He pushed his trencher aside, appetite gone. The waves below crashed against the rocks, sending a faint roar up through the windows. It reminded him of the quiet storm that swirled in his thoughts, an undercurrent of dread that never fully abated. He was not a man prone to fear, but he knew the cost of letting that dread fester. He'd come too far to surrender to it now. Late that afternoon, a raven arrived from the Crownlands, bearing the seal of King Tommen. Typically, official messages from the young king came laced with Cersei's wrath or the small council's entreaties. Baelish took the parchment in his private chambers, where thick drapes hid the golden sunlight. He broke the seal and read, "Lord Baelish, by the command of his grace, King Tommen of the houses Baratheon and Lannister, we invite your immediate presence at the Red Keep to account for your stewardship of the Westerlands. Rumors abound that your position in Casterly Rock has been misrepresented. We desire clarity. Should you comply willingly, His Grace offers the assurance of safe conduct. We request you present yourself no later than the first day of the next moon's turn." Signed, Ser Harry's SWYFT, Master of Laws. Baelish read it twice, noting the vaguely polite tone. He could practically smell Cersei's desperation in every word. They needed to ascertain how he had managed to seize the Lannister seat. Perhaps they hoped to ensnare him in King's Landing, away from his fortress. Or they wanted a chance to crush him on the road. Safe conduct, indeed. He knew better than to trust any courtesy extended by the Queen Regent. He tapped the parchment against the edge of the table, thinking, if he did not respond, it would be tantamount to open defiance of the crown. If he did go, he might be placing himself in mortal danger. Could there be a gambit worth playing in King's Landing, though? Perhaps if he appeared, calm and confident, with a retinue of men, he might sway the lords of the capital to see that the Lannisters' time was ended. But that would be a staggering risk. He set the parchment aside. There was another angle. Ignoring the summons might reveal to other lords that Baelish was not truly in the crown's favor. So far, he had walked a fine line, forging the impression that his hold on Casterly Rock had some measure of royal blessing, or at least that the crown was too fractured to remove him. But if the monarchy's invitation went unanswered, that illusion could crumble. Allies might desert him, concluding that his days were numbered. A faint headache pulsed at his temples. So many variables, so many shadows. If he had not been certain that the Lannisters' power base was irreparably weakened, he might not have dared this. But the time for second-guessing was long past. The moment he'd walked through the castle's gates, forging a false edict in Cersei's name, he had committed fully. He resolved to stall. He would pen a reply, couched in polite terms, requesting more time to arrange the governance of the Westerlands in his absence. That would buy him a few more weeks, at least. If the crown pressed harder, he could stall further or find a pretext for refusal. When night fell, he returned to the high balconies, drawn by the lonely hush of the sea. Standing there, he could almost hear Tywin Lannister's voice. Stern, calculating. What would Tywin have done had their roles been reversed? Baelish suspected the old lion would have crushed him outright, never allowing the infiltration to reach such a point. But Tywin was dead, and the Lannisters left behind lacked his unyielding competence. He looked down at the cliffs. He thought of how the rock's face had been carved into towers and halls, how House Lannister had boasted of its unassailable nature for centuries. Now that fortress was in his hands. A mockingbird perched upon the lion's throne. At that moment, a light from the courtyard below drew his attention. A torch, moving unusually fast. Then came a commotion of voices, muffled by distance. Baelish frowned, stepping closer to the balustrade. Guards were rushing toward the gates. For a moment, he wondered if this was another sabotage attempt or an infiltration. He hurried down the spiral staircases, 2 guards at his heels. In the courtyard, he found Rudge One-Eye standing with half a dozen mercenaries, forming a loose circle around a cloaked stranger who stood in the torchlight, hands raised to show he carried no weapon. At Baelish's approach, Rudge turned and gave a curt nod. "This one says he brings urgent word from the King's Road," Rudge said. "Claims it's something you'll want to hear personally. I can slit his throat if you prefer." Baelish shot the Sellsword a withering look, then nodded at the cloaked man. "Speak, quickly." The stranger pulled back his hood, revealing a lean face with intelligent eyes. "I come from an ally of yours in King's Landing, or at least, someone who has no fondness for the Lannisters. She told me to give you this message." He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small sealed letter. Baelish snapped his fingers, and one of his guards took the letter, checked it for hidden needles or powders, then handed it to him. He recognized the seal at once. A hummingbird, pressed in green wax. "Leave us," Baelish instructed Rudge, who hesitated but obeyed. The Sellsword gestured to the others, and they drifted back a few paces, still watchful. Baelish broke the seal and read the letter by torchlight. It was short, but the style was reminiscent of a certain courtier in King's Landing with whom Baelish had once done business, an official from the Reach, known for switching loyalties when it suited. The letter was cryptic. "Lord Baelish, the Queen grows desperate. She now courts the idea of forging a pact with those once deemed enemies, all for the sake of reclaiming her father's seat. Beware the Tyrells. They smell opportunity where the lion grows weak. If you value your position, do not underestimate the reach of Highgarden's gold and ambition." Signed, a well-wisher. Baelish's grip on the parchment tightened. So, Cersei might be seeking common ground with Mace Tyrell or Olenna Tyrell, though Olenna had never been shy about her disdain for Cersei. Still, if House Tyrell sensed a chance to claim the Westerlands or at least profit from its chaos, they might join a campaign against Baelish. The Tyrells had their own wealth, their own armies. If they were sufficiently motivated, they could raise a force far larger than Jaime's ragged band. He raised his eyes to the messenger. "Your master is well informed. Do you know anything more?" The man shook his head. "Only that the Queen Regent has been seen meeting secretly with Lord Tarly and Lord Redwine's representatives." Shipments of provisions and arms have been moving west by circuitous routes. They might be building up for something big. Baelish watched the man carefully. He sensed no deception. This was too specific to be a random lie. What do you stand to gain by telling me this? My employer pays me well. That's all you need to know. I risk my life coming here, but gold is a powerful motivator. Baelish nodded in understanding. His coin had bought many secrets in the past. Others out there were doing the same. Very well. You have my thanks. Speak to the steward at the gate. He will see you housed for the night and fed. Then you will be gone by dawn. Understood? Yes, my lord. The messenger bowed, replaced his hood, and disappeared into the darkness. Baelish stood quietly, his mind already racing. Cersei and the Tyrells, what a match of vipers that would be. He had long known Olenna Tyrell to be as cunning as any player in King's Landing, if not more so, and Margaery Tyrell had once ensnared kings with her charms. Though Margaery might be out of the picture now, it didn't mean House Tyrell lacked influence. If they combined their forces with whatever was left of the Lannisters' loyal bannermen, that army could very well test his hold on Casterly Rock in a way Jaime's smaller efforts had not. He pressed his lips into a thin line, then called for Rudge. The sellsword appeared, his men trailing him. We may have trouble on the horizon. I want our watch doubled. Nobody enters or leaves the rock without thorough searches and explicit permission. Rudge spat on the ground. Aye, not too different from what we do already, but we'll tighten it. Good. Also, Baelish continued, lowering his voice, I want you to send discreet word to some of the mountain clans east of the Westerlands, the ones who harry travelers on the Gold Road. Let them know that if they spot a large Tyrell force attempting to pass through, they'll be rewarded for any disruption they can cause. Rudge's face creased into a feral grin. Heh, those clans would do it for free if they smell plunder. But I'll make sure they know where the best coin is. Baelish nodded, then gestured for the men to stand down. As they dispersed, he lingered in the courtyard. The stars above seemed distant and cold. He had always imagined that once he seized the ultimate prize, he could manipulate events from a position of unparalleled strength. Yet every day brought fresh evidence that the higher you climb, the more your enemies gather below, hungrily waiting to see you fall. The next weeks stretched in tense anticipation. Baelish fortified the rock's defenses, ensuring that each bastion and wall walk was manned by reliable soldiers and crossbowmen. He renewed secret deals with certain captains in Lannisport, ensuring that any foreign or crown-allied fleet would be delayed or sabotaged. Bribes flowed like water into the pockets of local merchants and lesser lords. In some corners, the deception that Baelish held a legitimate royal charter still held sway, albeit tenuously. Meanwhile, ravens flew out under his seal, carrying requests for information to his various agents. The responses trickled back in coded messages. Indeed, there was movement on the roads leading from the Reach toward the Westerlands. Small contingents at first, each bearing supplies. House Tarly was rumored to be sending a significant number of troops, possibly under a banner of the crown. The Redwynes had begun shifting ships, though none had been spotted near Lannisport. Yet, he was reminded of a lesson from the War of the Five Kings. The Reach could field one of the largest armies in Westeros, thanks to fertile lands and abundant manpower. Even if House Tyrell was no longer as firmly ensconced in King's Landing as before, they still commanded immense resources. Cersei might be reckless, but the Tyrell lords were anything but. Their combination could be deadly. In late evening on a damp, cold day, a small host of riders approached Casterly Rock under a flag of parley. Baelish watched from a balcony as the men were admitted through the gates. At their head was a grizzled knight wearing the sigil of House Crakehall. That house had remained outwardly loyal to the Lannisters even after Baelish's takeover. The question was, had they come to negotiate or to threaten? Down in the courtyard, Baelish met them personally, escorted by a dozen armed men with crossbows at the ready. The visitors' clothing was spattered with mud, their horses lathered. The knight, Sir Glendon Crakehall, swung off his steed and dipped a stiff bow. "Lord Baelish," he said, his tone caught between grudging respect and fury. "I bring word from the lords assembled near Ashmark. They say you have no rightful claim to the rock and demand you relinquish it in the name of the Lion Throne." Baelish offered a pleasant smile. "How polite of them. I recall no mention of the Lion Throne in the royal edicts, but I do recall something about the Queen Regent delegating authority to me. Nevertheless, come inside. We'll speak more comfortably than out here in the mud." Crakehall hesitated, clearly aware that stepping inside might mean stepping into a trap. But the guards remained in place, and he had little choice if he wished to complete his mission. He nodded warily. Within the castle's entry hall, braziers cast long shadows on the marble floors. Baelish led Sir Glendon and a few of his companions toward a smaller audience chamber, leaving the rest to wait under guard in the courtyard. Once the doors were shut, Baelish took a seat in a high-backed chair carved with the shape of a lion's paws at the armrests, a sardonic choice he couldn't resist. Crakehall removed his gauntlets, standing stiffly. "So," Baelish said, leaning forward, "what precisely are the demands from Ashmark?" Crakehall cleared his throat. "The lords gathered there, Ser Davin Lannister, Lord Brax, Lord Marbrand, and others, say you must relinquish Casterly Rock to the rightful lord of the Westerlands, who they claim is Ser Jaime Lannister. They offer safe passage if you surrender without bloodshed. Refuse, and you will face their combined forces." Baelish tapped his finger on the armrest. "And if I refuse politely?" Crakehall's lip twitched. "They vow to lay siege with whatever men they can rally from the surrounding lands, and from the Reach. Word is House Tarly has already sent outriders, and more might follow. You can't hope to withstand the entire might of the West and the Reach combined, not with a handful of mercenaries." "That's quite the presumption," Baelish said quietly. "I appreciate your courage in bringing me this message. So, tell me, did they give you any instructions about negotiating terms? Or did they simply send you to deliver an ultimatum?" Crakehall's silence answered that question well enough. Still, he pressed on, his expression weary. "You must understand, many of these lords have always served the Lannisters. They didn't take kindly to your infiltration. They see it as an affront, a stain on their honor. If you surrender, you might preserve your life. Persist, and the cost could be high, for you and for everyone here." Baelish paused, letting the tension build. "And what is your opinion, Sir Glendon? Do you believe it wise to clash steel? Or would it not be better to avoid spilling the blood of the West's people?" Crakehall's gaze flickered. "I would rather avoid war, my lord, but I obey my liege, and my liege is Ser Jaime Lannister, whether or not he bears the formal title of Lord Paramount." Baelish nodded, rising from his seat. He paced across the room, tapping a gloved finger against his chin. "The gates of war open too easily in Westeros. I've seen enough bloodshed to fill 1,000 ravens' quills. But ironically, you might find that I share your desire for peace. So let me propose an alternative. Return to your lords and inform them that I am open to negotiation. If Jaime Lannister wishes the rock to remain in Lannister hands, let him come and speak with me. We'll see if there's a path to resolution that doesn't involve tens of thousands of men dying." Crakehall looked perplexed. "You would allow him to enter the rock?" Baelish gave a calm shrug. "Certainly, under truce. I am not a savage. It benefits none of us if the region collapses into another war. We are all loyal subjects of King Tommen, are we not? Let us see if we can find common ground under the crown's auspices." The irony of that statement was thick, given Baelish's entire rule here was built on the flimsiest veneer of crown endorsement. But Crakehall, perhaps too frustrated by the swirl of conflicting claims, simply nodded. "I will carry your words to Ashmark, Lord Baelish, though I cannot promise how they'll be received." "I expect nothing more," Baelish said, signaling the end of the audience. "You and your men may rest overnight, then go on your way." With that, he departed the chamber, motioning for Rudge and the guards to take over. Let them feed Crakehall, show him just enough courtesy to confirm that Baelish was not a bloodthirsty tyrant. Sometimes, a show of magnanimity could do more to prevent war than any threat. Once alone in a corridor, Baelish's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the tension beneath. An alliance of lords at Ashmark, reinforced by the Tyrells, posed a real threat. He could attempt to bribe some of those houses, but if too many rallied around Jaime in the name of Lannister tradition, even Baelish's coin might not suffice to scatter them. The near-constant friction of the War of the Five Kings had sown resentments, but it had also bonded certain loyalists more tightly to the Lannister banner. He turned a corner and made for his private library, a small chamber where he could spread out maps of the Westerlands. His footsteps echoed in the corridors, lined with crimson banners displaying the Golden Lion. He had left many of them in place to maintain the illusion of continuity, but now he wondered if it was time to remove them to mark a new era. Or would that inflame resentment further among the local population, fueling the desire to retake the seat for the Lion's rightful heirs? A guard held the library door open. Baelish slipped inside, where a wide table held a detailed map of the Westerlands. Ridges, rivers, roads, each castle and major holdfast marked. By lamplight he studied the layout. Ashmark sat somewhat inland, and a direct route from there to Casterly Rock passed through rolling hills that offered enough vantage points for an advancing army. Lannisport lay to the south of the rock, easily accessible by a broad road. If House Tarly or other Reach forces came up from the southeast, it was possible they might strike in tandem with the local Lannister loyalists. He drummed his fingers on the table, eyes tracking potential choke points. The narrow passes near Ridding might be a place to stage an ambush or to force an engagement on unfavorable terrain. With enough men, one could hold a pass for days against a larger army. But Baelish wasn't sure he had enough men to pull that off unless he drained the garrison at the rock, and that was a risk he wouldn't casually take. A scratch at the door. Baelish called, "Come." It was one of his more discreet knights from the Vale, Ser Albar Royce, a distant cousin to Jon Royce, but more open to Baelish's gold than to family tradition. Albar bowed. "My lord, the messenger from the Vale arrived. He carries letters that may require your immediate attention." Baelish's pulse quickened. "Bring him in." Albar stepped aside, admitting a young man in travel-stained garb, a silver-winged crest pinned to his cloak, the sigil of House Royce. The messenger dipped his head respectfully and produced a small bundle of rolled parchments. Baelish accepted them, all bearing the sigils of various Vale houses: Corbray, Waynwood, Templeton, and even the Falcon and Moon of House Arryn. He skimmed the first letter, which came from Lady Anya Waynwood. "Lord Baelish, there is disquiet in the Vale. Lord Nestor Royce, in his capacity as Keeper of the Gates of the Moon, has found your prolonged absence troubling. Some lords question the future of young Lord Robert's wardship under your care. Whispers abound that if you do not return soon, the Vale might choose a new regent." He felt a twinge of annoyance. The Vale had been the cornerstone of his power, a place where he could manipulate young Robert Arryn with ease and keep the gates closed to external threat. Now that he was so focused on holding the rock, he had neglected that foundation. If the Vale lords removed him as Lord Protector or whatever title he had contrived, he might lose the knights that had helped him seize the rock in the first place. He read on. Some speak of an alliance with House Stark in the north, others with House Tully in the Riverlands, to protect the Vale from the chaos that continues in the south and west. With winter on the horizon, they want strong leadership. They do not believe your seat in Casterly Rock benefits them. I urge you to clarify your position swiftly, lest you find the Vale closed to you upon your return. It was signed politely, but the warning was clear. The Vale lords had tolerated him mostly out of convenience and intimidation, but if they perceived him as an absentee tyrant using their resources for personal conquests, they might unite against him. The second letter carried the wax of House Corbray, from Lyn Corbray himself, a famously volatile knight who once seemed open to Baelish's bribes. The letter was short, laced with typical Corbray vitriol, suggesting that if Baelish did not return to reaffirm his hold on the Vale, others would step in. It ended with a cryptic remark. "Power is a curious thing, Lord Baelish. Just as one snatches a seed of gold, another might snatch a seed of stone." He set the letters aside, exhaling slowly. Threads of his control began to slip from his grasp like eels. Once more, the question arose. Should he remain in the rock, risking the Vale's defection, or attempt a swift journey east to secure his original seat of power. Leaving Casterly Rock for too long might allow Jaime or Tyrell forces to retake it in his absence, or at the very least undermine the authority he'd so carefully fostered. His mind went to Robert Arryn, the sickly boy who was so easy to manipulate, who believed Baelish was his protector and friend. If the lords decided to remove Baelish's influence, they might install a new regent, someone with no loyalty to him. Then his days of drawing on the Vale's resources would be finished. He looked up at Albar Royce. "How many knights from the Vale remain in the Rock?" "Fewer than 50, my lord," came the response. "Some were sent to guard supply routes, others to quell pockets of unrest. Many returned to the Vale earlier at your command, to show we were not abandoning it entirely." Baelish drummed his fingers on the letter. 50 is hardly enough to hold off a large force if it comes to open battle. But for infiltration and sabotage, it might suffice. He paused. "I may need to send you back to the Vale with instructions for Lord Robert and the other lords. Something to maintain my position until I can return." Albar bowed low. "I am your man, my lord. Whatever you command." "Very good." He set aside the letters, feeling the weight of them pressing on his shoulders. Even if he mustered a cunning defense here, the foundation he built in the Vale might crumble, and everything would come crashing down eventually. 1,000 illusions had to be maintained at once, and that required more than cunning, it required presence. He turned his attention to the map of the Vale pinned on a smaller board. The Ares silhouette perched on the eastern mountains like a hawk. If Baelish dared to journey there, he could reaffirm his hold and come back with a larger force. But traveling openly with a host might take too long and alert every enemy on the roads. He could slip away in secret, but leaving the Rock in the hands of subordinates felt like inviting betrayal. Yet he could not ignore the fact that Casterly Rock, formidable though it was, sat in a region now uniting under the banner of reclaiming it for House Lannister. And a bold move by the Tyrells could tip the balance. Gold might buy him time, but to truly secure the fortress, he needed either a major alliance or a significant fighting force. He had neither in abundance. His gaze shifted to a small chest in the corner. Inside were documents forged with the Queen Regent's seal, false edicts that had helped him seize control. Could a new forgery turn the Tyrells away or redirect them? Perhaps something implying that the crown had promised the westerly lands beyond the Mander to Highgarden if it did not interfere. But forging a royal edict of that magnitude carried immense risk. If discovered, it would shred any last veneer of legitimacy he possessed. Time. He needed more time. As if answering his unspoken plea, a knock at the door preceded Daretha's voice. "My lord, a raven just arrived from King's Landing." "Urgent." Baelish sighed. It was always urgent, always a matter of life and death. "Bring it," he said. Dareth entered, clutching a parchment. He handed it over and stood wringing his hands. Baelish slid a finger under the seal, another from the crown, though the wax was not the same as Tommen's previous letter. This one bore the shape of a lion rampant, which told him it likely came from the Queen Regent's personal desk. He unfolded the parchment and read, "Lord Baelish, I have exhausted my patience. By the time this letter reaches you, you will have had ample opportunity to heed my summons. You have not. Should you continue to hide behind your false pretenses in Casterly Rock, I will personally see to it that you are declared an enemy of the crown. The Golden Company, newly arrived in Westeros, may be employed if that is what it takes to uproot you from the seat that does not belong to you. I suggest you consider your next move carefully. House Lannister does not forget, nor does it forgive. Cersei of the houses Lannister and Baratheon, Queen Regent." Baelish's heart skipped. The Golden Company? He had heard rumors that they might cross the Narrow Sea, or that various factions courted them. But the company's presence in Westeros proper was another matter. If Cersei managed to secure the Golden Company's formidable ranks, she might bypass the precarious alliances of the local lords altogether and march a mercenary army right up to his gates. He noticed a postscript scrawled beneath the Queen Regent's signature, the handwriting slanted and faintly smeared. "I have also dispatched my brother Jaime to rally every banner loyal to House Lannister. Together with our new allies, We will pry you from the rock you have stolen." Strangely, the letter made no mention of the Tyrells. Perhaps Cersei was keeping her negotiations with them secret, or perhaps she was forging multiple deals at once. Baelish turned to Dareth. "Have we heard any confirmed news that the Golden Company landed in Westeros?" Dareth shook his head, eyes wide. "Only rumor, my lord. Something about them appearing in the Stormlands or near the Blackwater. No solid confirmation." Baelish exhaled through his nose. He had sometimes joked that every Sellsword company in Essos would eventually find its way to Westeros once they smelled gold. Now it seemed that might be coming true. Keep listening for more. If the Golden Company truly aligns with the Lannisters, we must prepare for the worst. As Dareth retreated, Baelish allowed his composure to waver for a heartbeat. The Golden Company was reputed to be the most disciplined and loyal band of Sellswords in the known world. They would not be so easily subverted with a few bribes, especially if Cersei or some hidden benefactor could match or surpass his gold. He reached again for the letters from the Vale, skimming them in quick succession. If he lost the Vale, he lost a crucial source of knights, and his fallback if the rock became untenable. But if he abandoned the rock to shore up the Vale, he might not regain it, especially with the threat of the Golden Company looming. In that moment, he realized that the illusions he'd so carefully arranged might be on the verge of unraveling. Could he keep them woven long enough for a new opportunity to appear? That was how he'd always operated, maintaining a precarious balance until a sudden shift allowed him to leap forward. But was there a leap left to make? Or had he already made the final, most audacious jump by seizing Casterly Rock? He stared at the flickering candle on his desk, recalling a conversation he'd once had with Varys in the Red Keep. Something about chaos being a ladder. Climb the rungs or fall, and falling meant death. Well, he had climbed high indeed, had he not? Maybe too high. His resolve hardened. He would not yield. The letter from Cersei might be bluster, or it might herald a true cataclysm. Either way, he still had cards to play. He could sow rumors of an outbreak in Lannisport to delay the Golden Company's deployment, or feed the idea that Cersei meant to betray the Tyrells once she reclaimed the rock. He could sponsor raids on the roads from the Reach to slow any allied approach. Above all, he could keep weaving illusions until the West fell deeper into confusion. He rose, leaving the letters scattered across the table, and stepped to a window that faced the sea. His reflection in the glass looked tired, older than the mockingbird who once flitted through King's Landing with a confident smirk. But the spark of cunning in his eyes remained. If he was to fall, he would make it a costly, tangled downfall for any who dared challenge him. Over the coming days, the fortress buzzed with quiet preparations. Archers drilled in the courtyards, mercenaries sharpened blades, and new shipments of grain and salted fish arrived from the countryside, all funded by Baelish's gold. In Lannisport, certain ships were quietly commissioned to be outfitted for war, swift, maneuverable craft that could harass any invasion by sea. Rudge One Eye and his cutthroats scoured the region for potential saboteurs, while Baelish's trusted knights from the Vale patrolled the rock's interior. To the local houses, Baelish sent more letters, presenting himself as a fair-minded caretaker of the Westerlands, eager to avoid a ruinous conflict. To each, he offered small concessions. Reduced taxes here, a trade privilege there, and subtle warnings of what would happen if they turned openly against him. He reminded them that the Lannisters had squandered much of their gold, while he had fresh coin from the mines to distribute. Some lords wavered, sending ambiguous replies that refused to commit to either side. That was good enough for the moment, as it meant they hesitated to join Jaime's cause. And then, a fortnight after Sir Glendon Crakehall's visit, a rider galloped up to the gates at dusk, brandishing the white flag of truce. He bore a single letter, sealed with a golden lion. Baelish had him brought to the great hall, where the imposing banners of House Lannister still fluttered overhead, and a row of mockingbird-cloaked guards stood watch. The messenger, caked in dust from the road, knelt before Baelish, proffering the letter. Baelish broke the seal and read, "Lord Baelish, I accept your offer of parley. I will come to Casterly Rock in 2 weeks' time with a small escort. Do not mistake this for weakness. If you value your life, See that no harm befalls me or my men. Otherwise, the combined forces of the West and our allies will raze the rock to its foundations. Signed, Jaime Lannister. Baelish felt a stirring of satisfaction. Jaime's acceptance meant he was at least open to negotiation, which could buy more time, or even yield a compromise that cemented Baelish's hold. But equally, it could be a ploy to gauge the rock's defenses or create an opening for sabotage. He waved a hand dismissively. Very well. Inform Ser Jaime that he will be received under truce. Let him know I expect no more than 20 men at his side. And if he dares bring more, the gates will remain shut. The messenger nodded. Yes, my lord. As the rider was led away, Baelish lingered in the hall. He gazed upon the gilded lions carved into the pillars, each one a testament to House Lannister's centuries of unbroken power. A power he had managed to topple but not destroy. If Jaime walked through these corridors again, how would he react? Would he burn with rage or attempt to keep a knight's composure? Baelish's lips curled in a thin smile. 2 weeks. That was the window he had. He could fortify further, gather more intel, maybe sow fresh dissension among the Lannisters' would-be allies. Or, if his most daring plan succeeded, he might bring a hidden blade to the bargaining table. Something that would make Jaime see the futility of trying to reclaim a seat that was already lost. Quietly, Baelish exited the hall and ascended a narrow stairwell leading to the private chambers where he slept. Tywin Lannister's old apartments, now stripped of many personal items but still resonant with the old lion's aura. He closed the door, sat at a desk, and lit a candle. In the hush, he pulled out fresh parchment and began drafting letters. To the Vale, commanding Ser Albar Royce to express the gravity of Baelish's position and warn the lords against any hasty move to depose him. He offered them the potential for spoils if he triumphed in the West, an enticement of gold and new lands. To certain captains in the Narrow Sea, inquiring about the movement of the Golden Company. If they had truly landed, he wanted to know where they were camped and who was funding them. And one to a contact in the Stormlands, an old informant who might glean whether any Baratheon loyalists would consider meddling in Lannister affairs. He worked through the night, every scratch of the quill an effort to weave a thicker net of secrets and half-truths. By dawn, his eyes burned, and his hand shook from weariness, but he felt more resolved than ever. If Jaime meant to come, Baelish would be ready. If the Tyrells gathered for war, he would scatter them with cunning. If the Golden Company landed, he would drown them in illusions or pit them against other threats. All the while, he would guard his hold on the Vale, ensuring no one stole his foundation from under him. Power was a dance of knives, and only those with swift feet and sharper wits survived. Peter Baelish had danced through the Red Keep, through the Ares' treacherous heights, and now he danced upon the gilded precipice of the rock. Around him, the storms of war thundered, but so long as he kept his balance, the golden fortress remained his. He blew out the candle, watching the last curl of smoke drift into the cool air. Outside, the dawn light pushed through the windows, illuminating the chamber in pale gold. It seemed fitting here in the seat of the Lannisters. The day had come, and with it new perils. But Baelish would face them with the same ruthless calm he always had. The mockingbird still perched upon the lion's throne, and as long as he drew breath, he intended to ensure no roar would unseat him.